"You'll die alone," my daughter said coldly, her voice slicing through me like winter wind as she stood in my kitchen, the one where I'd taught her to bake her first cookies 27 years ago. Her eyes, my eyes, inherited from me, were now empty of anything resembling love. I clutched the edge of the counter, feeling suddenly old in my 63 years, the wedding ring I still wore after Robert's passing heavy on my finger. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my own parents, ticked away the silence between us. My Eleanor, my only child, had just told me I would die alone, and worse yet, I feared she might be right. I hadn't even told her about the cancer yet. The diagnosis had come 3 weeks ago. Pancreatic, stage 4, aggressive. The doctor had been kind but blunt. 6 months, maybe 8 with treatment. I'd planned to tell Eleanor today over the tea service her father had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I'd made her favorite lemon squares. I thought perhaps the familiar sweetness might soften the bitter news. But Eleanor hadn't come to hear news. She'd come with demands. "The house should go to me," she continued, setting her designer purse on my worn kitchen table. "It makes no sense for you to rattle around in this big place by yourself. Michael and I could use the equity to expand the business. You could move into Golden Sunset Acres. They have openings now. The retirement home across town, where people went to disappear. This is my home," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your father and I—" "Dad's dead, Mom," Eleanor interrupted, checking her manicured nails. "And he'd want us to be practical. The market's hot right now. We could get $700,000 for this place, easy." I looked around at the walls that had witnessed 41 years of my marriage, the door frame where we'd marked Eleanor's height every birthday, until she turned 16 and declared it childish, the window above the sink where I'd watched countless sunsets while washing dishes and dreaming of the years ahead. "How do you put a price on memory?" "I'm not selling," I said, the words leaving me before I'd even decided to say them. Eleanor's face changed then, hardened in a way that made her look like a stranger. My beautiful girl, who'd once crawled into my lap during thunderstorms, now looked at me like I was an obstacle, an inconvenience. "Fine," she said, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor Robert had refinished by hand the summer before he died. "Then don't expect Michael and me to come running when you fall and break your hip, or when you can't remember to turn the stove off. Don't call us when you're afraid at night or when the roof starts leaking again." I felt something crack inside me, not my heart, but something harder and more essential, like the foundation of a house shifting. "Eleanor, no, Mom. You made your choice. You've always been stubborn." She grabbed her purse. "You'll die alone in this house. That's what you're choosing." As she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the little girl who'd once worn my costume jewelry and called me the best mommy in America. Where had that child gone? When had my baby turned into this cold woman who saw me as nothing but a barrier to her inheritance? The door slammed, rattling the photos on the wall. Eleanor's graduation, her wedding, Robert holding our newborn grandchild. The sound echoed through the house, my house, bouncing off walls that suddenly felt like they were closing in. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Harold Jacobson, who'd been Robert's fishing buddy for 30 years. "It's time to update my will, Harold," I said, watching through the window as Eleanor's Mercedes backed out of the driveway, crushing the daffodils I'd planted along the edge. "And I need to do it tonight." I didn't know then what I was setting in motion. I couldn't have imagined how that single phone call would ignite a firestorm that would burn away everything false in my life, leaving only the truth, harsh and beautiful, in its wake. I didn't know that within months, Eleanor would see exactly what she'd become, or that I would finally see what I had always been, but never recognized. A woman of quiet, unbreakable strength. As I hung up the phone, the cancer diagnosis paper sat folded in my pocket. A secret wait. 6 months. 6 months to reclaim not just my life, but my death. 6 months to show my daughter that dying alone and dying lonely are two very different things. The clock struck 3. Harold would be here at 6. I had work to do. My name is Margaret Wilson, though most people in Fairview, Connecticut call me Maggie. For 41 years, I was Robert Wilson's wife. For 37 years, I was Eleanor's mother. For 15 years, I've been grandma to little Robert, named for his grandfather. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Margaret, the woman who once painted watercolors good enough to sell at local art fairs, who read Russian literature late into the night, who had dreams of seeing Paris before she died. Our house sits on Maple Street, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, where Robert and I used to watch summer thunderstorms roll in across the valley. We bought it when it was barely more than a shell, rotting floorboards, peeling wallpaper, a leaky roof, but Robert saw the bones of it, the potential. "This will be our forever home, Maggie," he'd said, spinning me around in what would become our bedroom. And for 4 decades it was. Every morning before Eleanor's visit, I woke at 6:30, made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and took my pills. A small pharmacy's worth for blood pressure, cholesterol, arthritis, and now the new ones that were supposed to buy me time. Time for what, exactly? The question haunted me as I moved through my quiet morning routine. Widowhood had come suddenly 3 years ago. A heart attack while Robert was changing the oil in his beloved Chevy. One minute he was humming Johnny Cash under the car, and the next, silence. By the time I found him, he was already gone. The funeral was a blur, Eleanor handling arrangements with efficient detachment, our grandson sobbing into my skirt, neighbors bringing casseroles I couldn't eat. I remembered thinking it wasn't supposed to happen this way. We had plans: Paris in the spring, a drive across the country to see the Grand Canyon, growing old together on our porch. Instead, I learned to sleep alone in our king-sized bed, to make coffee for one, to sit in silence where conversation once lived. Eleanor and Michael visited less after Robert died. At first, they claimed they didn't want to intrude on my grieving. Then it was their business, a real estate development company that seemed to consume every waking hour. Then it was little Robert's activities: soccer, piano, karate. The visits dwindled from weekly to monthly to holidays only. Phone calls became texts. Texts became silence. Meanwhile, I filled my days as best I could. I volunteered at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I joined a widows' walking group that met at the park on Wednesday mornings. I took up knitting, making blankets for the children's hospital. I was living, but I wasn't alive. Not really. Just marking time, waiting for something I couldn't name. The day before Eleanor's visit, Dr. Patterson had looked at my latest scans and shaken his head. "The treatment isn't working as we'd hoped, Margaret," he'd said gently. "The cancer is aggressive. I think it's time to consider quality of life over quantity." I'd nodded, strangely calm. "How long?" "Without continuing treatment? 3 months, possibly 4. He'd reached across his desk and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry." I'd driven home in a daze, the Connecticut spring blooming obscenely around me, cherry blossoms and daffodils, the world renewing itself while my body betrayed me. I decided to tell Eleanor right away. My only child should know. We would face this together, I thought. Perhaps this would be what brought her back to me. What a fool I'd been. As I waited for Harold to arrive that evening after Eleanor left, I moved through the house touching things. Robert's books, the quilt my grandmother had made, the crystal vase we'd received as a wedding gift. All these objects that held pieces of my life, that Eleanor now saw only as assets to be liquidated. The cancer didn't frighten me as much as her coldness did. The disease would take my body, but her indifference had already claimed something more precious. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. Harold Jacobson stood on my porch, his briefcase in hand, concern etched across his weathered face. In his 70 years, he'd seen the best and worst of families, helping them navigate the thorny paths of inheritance and legacy. He'd been there when Robert and I signed our first will, when we'd set up Eleanor's college fund, when we'd established the trust for little Robert. "Maggie," he said, giving me a gentle hug, "are you sure you want to do this tonight?" I nodded, stepping back to let him in. "I don't have time to waste, Harold." He looked at me curiously but didn't press. In the living room, I served him coffee in Robert's favorite mug, the one with fishing lures printed around the rim. Outside, the spring evening was fading into twilight, birds settling into the old oak tree Robert had refused to cut down, even when it threatened the roof during storms. "Tell me what you want," Harold said, opening his briefcase. I took a deep breath, the weight of my decision settling over me like a mantle. "I want to change everything." Harold left just after 9. My new will signed and witnessed by Mrs. Abernathy from next door, and her college-age son who'd come home for spring break. The house felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves had heard my decisions, and stood a little straighter, protective around me. I slept deeply that night for the first time since my diagnosis. No dreams troubled me, no phantom pains woke me, just darkness and rest. The next morning, Eleanor called. "Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday," she said, her voice carrying that forced brightness she used with difficult clients. "I was stressed about work. Michael and I had a big deal fall through." I remained silent, folding laundry with the phone tucked between my ear and shoulder. Fresh sheets smelled of lavender detergent, small pleasures I'd once taken for granted. "Anyway," she continued, filling my silence, "I was thinking maybe you could come for dinner this weekend. Michael's grilling steaks on Saturday. Little Robert misses you." The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. 3 years of missed birthdays and holidays, of canceled plans and shortened visits, and now suddenly my grandson missed me? No, this was about the house. Eleanor had reconsidered her approach, decided that honey might work where vinegar had failed. "I'd love to see Robert," I said carefully, "but I need to tell you something first, Eleanor. Something important." "What is it?" A note of impatience crept into her voice. Time was money in Eleanor's world, and I was taking too much of it. "I have pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The silence stretched so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Mom?" Her voice sounded smaller suddenly. "That's not funny." "No, it's not," I agreed. "Dr. Patterson gave me the diagnosis 3 weeks ago. The treatment isn't working. I have maybe 3 or 4 months." Another long pause. I could almost hear the calculations happening in her head, the asset evaluation, the timeline adjustments. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she finally asked, but the question lacked genuine hurt. It was accusatory, as if I'd kept a business secret from a partner. "I tried to tell you yesterday," I said. "I made lemon squares." "Jesus, Mom," she sighed heavily. "This changes everything. You can't stay in that house now. It's not safe. You'll need care. Hospice eventually. We should list the property immediately before I die," I silently finished for her. "I'm not selling the house, Eleanor," I said firmly, "and I've already arranged for care when the time comes." "What? How? When?" The rapid-fire questions betrayed her alarm. She was losing control of the situation, of me. "I met with Harold Jacobson last night. Everything's been arranged." "Harold? Dad's fishing buddy?" "Mom, he's ancient. You need a specialist in elder law, someone who understands estate planning, and my will is updated. My advance directives are clear. I've hired a service that will provide in-home care when I need it." I folded the last pillowcase and placed it on the stack. "You don't need to worry about any of it. I'm your daughter. Of course I need to worry." Her voice rose an octave. "What does the will say now? What have you done?" There it was, the real concern, laid bare. "Why don't you come for lunch tomorrow?" I suggested. "We can discuss everything then." "I can't tomorrow. I have showings all day." "Sunday then. We're taking Robert to his swim meet in Hartford." Always an excuse. Always something more important than me. "Fine. Monday at noon. I'll make sandwiches." She agreed reluctantly, and we hung up without the usual meaningless love you that had become our habit over the years. Progress, of a sort. At least we were being honest now. Monday arrived with a spring rain that drummed against the windows. I'd spent the weekend sorting through old photographs. Eleanor as a gap-toothed kindergartner, Robert teaching her to ride a bike, family vacations to the Maine coast, Eleanor's high school graduation with her father beaming beside her. Where had that family gone? When had money and status replaced love in my daughter's value system? The clock struck 12, but Eleanor didn't arrive. At 12:30, I made myself a sandwich and ate alone at the kitchen table. At 1, I called her cell phone. Straight to voicemail. At 2, I heard a car in the driveway. Not Eleanor's Mercedes, but Michael's Range Rover. My son-in-law came alone. His tall frame stooped slightly, as if carrying an invisible burden as he walked to my door. "Michael," I said, surprised. We'd never been particularly close. He'd always been more Eleanor's husband than my son-in-law, keeping a polite but unbridgeable distance between us. "Margaret?" He nodded, stepping inside. He never called me Mom or Maggie. Always formal, always correct. Today he looked uncomfortable, his normally confident demeanor replaced by something almost sheepish. Eleanor couldn't make it. Client emergency. "Of course," I said, leading him to the kitchen where the sandwiches sat untouched. "Would you like lunch?" He shook his head. "Eleanor sent me to talk about the will." No pretense then. I appreciated that at least. What about it? Michael shifted in his seat. She's concerned about your state of mind, with the diagnosis and all. Grief can make people do irrational things. I almost smiled. I'm not grief-stricken, Michael. I'm dying. There's a difference. He flinched at my bluntness. Still, major decisions should probably wait until I'm dead. That would make things rather difficult, don't you think? For a moment, I saw a flash of the man Eleanor had fallen in love with in college. Someone with a sense of humor before real estate developments and country club memberships became his personality. He almost smiled. Look, Margaret, I'll be straight with you. Eleanor found out you've removed her as executor of your estate. She's hurt. So Harold had already filed the paperwork. Good. Is she hurt, Michael? Or is she afraid she's lost control of my assets? He had the decency to look away. You know how she is. She likes to manage things. Yes, she does. She's very much like her father that way. I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. But this isn't about Eleanor managing things. This is about me deciding what happens to what's mine. The house is my house, I finished firmly. Robert and I paid for it. We restored it. We lived our lives in it. It's mine to do with as I please. Michael leaned forward, his business face sliding into place. Be reasonable, Margaret. You're ill. You need care. The house is your biggest asset. Eleanor is just trying to make sensible arrangements. By telling me I'll die alone, the words hung in the air between us. Michael blinked, genuinely shocked. She said that to you? I nodded. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking tired. I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know, Michael. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. Tell Eleanor if she wants to discuss my will, she can come herself. Not send her husband or call my attorney behind my back, which I know she's already tried to do because Harold told me. Michael rose, defeated. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry about your diagnosis. No one should have to face that. Thank you, I said, and meant it. And little Robert really does miss you. That wasn't just, he asks about you all the time. Something warm and painful unfurled in my chest. Tell him Grandma misses him too. After Michael left, I sat on the porch swing, listening to the rain and thinking about legacy. Not money or property, but what really remains of us when we're gone. What would Eleanor remember of me? What stories would little Robert tell his children about his grandmother? And what would I do with the precious little time I had left to change those stories? That evening, Eleanor called again. Michael told me what you said, about dying alone. Her voice was tight, controlled. I shouldn't have said that. It was cruel. Yes, it was, I agreed. But you're being unreasonable about the house, Mom, and changing the will without consulting me. Eleanor, I interrupted, suddenly exhausted. I'm dying. I get to decide how that happens and what comes after. But, no, for once in your life, listen to me. I've made my decisions. They're legal and binding. If you want to be part of my remaining time, you're welcome as my daughter, not as my estate manager. She was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. What's in the will? She finally asked. Come see me, really see me, and maybe I'll tell you. I ended the call before she could respond, turning off my phone and sitting in the growing darkness of my living room. 3 to 4 months. Not long to undo years of damage. Not long to teach final lessons. Not long to live whatever life I had left. But perhaps just enough time for truth. Before the cancer, before Robert's death, before Eleanor grew cold and distant, there was a time when love flowed easily between us, when sacrifice felt natural rather than burdensome. Looking at old photographs in the attic, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, filtering through the small window, I remembered who we had been. Robert and I had been married just 3 years when I discovered I was pregnant with Eleanor. We were living in a tiny apartment in New Haven where Robert was finishing his engineering degree on the GI Bill after serving in Vietnam. I was working as a receptionist at a law firm, typing papers for law students on the side for extra money. We were poor, but hopeful, saving every penny for a house someday. The pregnancy was difficult. Hyperemesis had me hospitalized twice. I lost my job when the vomiting made it impossible to work the front desk. Robert took on night shifts at a warehouse while still attending classes during the day. I remember him coming home at dawn, his hands rough with calluses, falling into bed for just a few hours before his 9 a.m. thermodynamics class. It's worth it, he'd say. kissing my forehead before leaving again. "We're building something here, Maggie. A family." When my water broke 6 weeks early, Robert had been in the middle of final exams. The neighbor drove me to the hospital while someone ran across campus to find him. Eleanor arrived before he did. Tiny, fighter from her first breath, her lungs surprisingly strong for her size. When Robert finally burst into the delivery room, still in his exam clothes, Eleanor was already swaddled in my arms. "She's perfect," he'd whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Just like her mother." We brought her home to the apartment with its leaky faucet and temperamental heating, where we'd set up a bassinet in the corner of our bedroom. Those first months were a blur of exhaustion and joy, of counting dimes for formula when my milk wouldn't come in, of Robert walking the floor with Eleanor at 3 a.m. so I could sleep before my new job as a bank teller started at 8. When Eleanor was 2, Robert graduated and got his first engineering job at a firm in Hartford. We moved to a slightly larger apartment, celebrated by buying a cake we couldn't afford. By the time she was 4, we had saved enough for a down payment on the house, our house, though it was barely habitable then. "Are you sure about this place?" I'd asked Robert, as we stood in what would become our kitchen, rain dripping through the ceiling into strategically placed buckets. "I can fix it," he'd said confidently. "Besides, look at that oak tree in the backyard. Perfect for a swing, don't you think? Eleanor will love it." And she had. I closed my eyes, remembering her squeals of delight as Robert pushed her on the tire swing he'd hung that first summer, the way her blonde hair flew around her face, how her laughter had been the soundtrack to our early years in this house. Eleanor at 7, helping me plant daffodils along the driveway, her small hands covered in dirt. Eleanor at 10, sitting at this very kitchen table as I helped her with fractions, her forehead creased in concentration. Eleanor at 13, storming up the stairs after our first real fight, slamming her bedroom door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Eleanor at 16, dressed for her first dance. Robert and I watching from the bottom of the stairs, both of us trying not to cry at how quickly she was growing up. Eleanor at 18, opening her college acceptance letter to Yale, jumping up and down in this living room while Robert swept me into a dance. Both of us so proud we thought our hearts might burst. What had happened to that girl? Where along the way had she transformed from our joyful child into a woman who saw her dying mother as an inconvenience? The college years had begun the change. We'd remortgaged the house to help pay her tuition, though we never told her that. Robert worked overtime. I took on a second job as a bookkeeper for a local business. We wanted her to focus on her studies, not worry about money. "We can give her what we never had," Robert would say when I worried about the bills. "An education without debt, a clean start." In her sophomore year, Eleanor met Michael, a business major from a wealthy Boston family. Their world, of sailing trips and ski vacations, of connections and old money, was foreign to us. The first time Michael came for dinner, I'd spent days cleaning the house, worried about impressing him. I'd made pot roast, Robert's favorite, and used my mother's good china. "Your house has character," Michael had said, looking around at our modest living room with its secondhand furniture. I'd heard the polite disdain in his voice, but Eleanor seemed oblivious, too in love to notice. After graduation, they moved to New York for Michael's first job at an investment firm. Eleanor took a position in real estate, discovering she had a talent for sales. They visited less and less, holidays only, then every other Christmas. When they announced they were moving back to Connecticut to start their own development company, I'd been overjoyed, thinking we'd be close again. Instead, they bought a sprawling house in the new luxury development across town, the estates at Fairview Glen, and continued to live in a world apart from ours. When little Robert was born, I thought things would change. I knitted him a blanket during the long months of Eleanor's pregnancy, working on it every evening while actual Robert watched baseball on TV. "She'll need us now," I'd told my husband. "Babies change everything." And for a while, that seemed true. Eleanor called more often, asking advice about feedings and sleep schedules. I watched little Robert one day a week so she could go into the office. Robert built a crib that converted to a toddler bed, sanding each slat by hand until it was satin smooth. Then, when little Robert was 3, Eleanor hired a nanny, a young woman with a degree in early childhood education and references from several prominent families in the area. My weekly babysitting day was no longer needed. The visits dwindled again. Robert and I found ourselves on the periphery of our grandson's life, invited to birthday parties where we barely knew anyone, given carefully scheduled holiday hours amidst Eleanor and Michael's busy social calendar. My fingers traced a photo of Robert holding newborn Eleanor in the hospital. His face so young, so full of hope and fear and love. He'd given everything for her. His time, his strength, his dreams of traveling the world. He'd worked 60-hour weeks to pay for dance lessons and soccer camps, private math tutoring when she struggled in 8th grade, SAT prep courses, college applications. When had our sacrifices become invisible to her? When had all we'd given been transformed in her mind to all she was owed? The afternoon light in the attic was fading now, the dust motes disappearing into shadow. My knees ached from kneeling too long on the hard floor, a sharp pain in my side reminding me of the disease steadily consuming me from within. I gathered the photos, not all of them, just the ones that told the truth of our family, and made my way carefully down the narrow attic stairs. In the hallway, I stopped at Eleanor's old bedroom, preserved like a museum exhibit to a daughter who no longer existed. The canopy bed Robert had built when she was 9, the bookshelves filled with novels I'd read to her before bedtime, the desk where she'd written her college application essays while I brought her cups of hot chocolate. So many memories in this house, so much love embedded in its walls. I wouldn't let Eleanor sell it, not to developers who would tear it down to build another luxury estate, not to strangers who wouldn't know that the mark on the kitchen door frame at 5'2" was from the summer Eleanor shot up 3 inches and finally became taller than me, not to anyone who wouldn't understand that this house wasn't just wood and plaster, but the physical manifestation of a family's love and sacrifice. I had 3 months left, 3 months to make Eleanor see what she'd become, and what she stood to lose that was far more valuable than real estate. Downstairs, I arranged the selected photos on the dining room table, along with documents I'd been gathering since my diagnosis, bank statements from the second mortgage, receipts from Eleanor's dance competitions, the loan papers from when we'd helped Eleanor and Michael with the down payment on their first condo in New York. Then I called Harold. "It's time for the next step," I told him. "Can you come by tomorrow morning and bring the documents I asked about?" "Are you sure about this, Maggie?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "It might only make things worse." "I'm dying, Harold," I said simply. "Things can't get much worse than that, but maybe they can get better before I go." After hanging up, I sent a text to Eleanor. "Dinner at my house, Thursday, 7 p.m. Just you. Important." Her reply came almost instantly. "Can't Thursday. Client dinner." "Of course." I texted back. "This isn't a request, Eleanor. It's about the will. Thursday, 7 p.m. This time, her response took longer. "Fine, but I can only stay an hour." I set down my phone and looked out the window at the oak tree, its spring leaves still small but growing. Robert and I had planted daffodils under that tree on our 10th anniversary. They were blooming now, bright yellow against the green grass, oblivious to the human drama unfolding inside the house they adorned. How many more springs would they bloom after I was gone? Who would see them and remember why they had been planted there? Who would know that each bulb represented a year of our marriage, planted with hope for all the years to come? Some legacies couldn't be measured in dollar amounts or square footage. Some inheritances weren't listed in wills or trusts. These were the things I needed Eleanor to understand before it was too late, for both of us. Thursday evening arrived with a spectacular spring sunset that painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'd spent the day preparing, not just the meal, Eleanor's childhood favorite, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, and apple pie, but also my heart and mind for what was to come. Harold had brought the final documents that morning, along with his concerns. "This is within your legal rights, Maggie," he'd said, his weathered hands smoothing the papers on my kitchen table. "But are you sure it's what you want? There's no going back once this is set in motion." "I'm sure," I'd told him. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to show them the truth about themselves. And if she can't handle that truth?" I had no answer for him then. I still didn't, as I set the dining room table with my mother's china, the good dishes we used only for holidays and special occasions. Tonight certainly qualified as special, though I doubted Eleanor would see it that way. At exactly 7:02 p.m., her Mercedes pulled into the driveway, parking carefully away from the daffodils this time. Small mercies. Through the window, I watched her check her lipstick in the rearview mirror, take a deep breath as if preparing for battle, then emerge from the car in a tailored black pantsuit that probably cost more than Robert's monthly pension. She looked beautiful and foreign to me, this polished woman with her designer haircut and subtle jewelry. Where was the girl who used to run barefoot through sprinklers in our backyard? Who fell asleep with books on her chest and peanut butter smeared on her cheek? I opened the door before she could knock. "You're on time," I said, genuinely surprised. Eleanor brushed past me into the foyer, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume. I said I would be. "Something smells good. Pot roast," I said, closing the door. "I thought we could eat first, then talk." She glanced at her watch. "I told you I only have an hour. Let's just get to the point." The dismissal of the meal I'd spent hours preparing, her favorite meal, struck deeper than it should have. "Fine," I said. "We can talk in the dining room." She followed me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors Robert had refinished just months before his heart attack. In the dining room, she saw the table, not set for dinner as expected, but laid out with photographs and documents, carefully arranged in chronological order. "What's all this?" she asked, confusion replacing the impatient expression she'd worn since arriving. "Sit down," I said, taking my own place at the head of the table where Robert used to sit for holiday meals. "This is what we need to talk about." Reluctantly, Eleanor sat, placing her designer handbag on the floor beside her. "If this is some kind of guilt trip about this," I interrupted, pointing to a photo of Robert holding her as a newborn, "is where our family began. You were 6 weeks premature. The hospital bills were more than our annual income. We were still paying them off when you started kindergarten." Eleanor frowned. "Mom, I don't see what ancient history has to do with this," I continued, sliding a document toward her. "Is the second mortgage we took out on this house to pay for your college. Your father didn't want you to know. He said it would make you worry, distract you from your studies. $120,000, Eleanor, at 7% interest." She stared at the mortgage papers, her face unreadable. "This is the loan we gave you and Michael for the down payment on your New York condo. $50,000 that you promised to repay in 5 years. We're still waiting." "We've been busy starting the business," she said defensively. "You said there was no rush." "And this," I pushed forward a file of medical reports, "is my cancer. Stage 4 pancreatic. Terminal. 3 months without treatment, maybe 6 with it, though the side effects may make those 6 months hardly worth living." Eleanor paled, finally looking at me directly. "There must be something else they can try. Experimental treatments? Clinical trials?" "There isn't," I said firmly. "I've explored every option. This is happening, Eleanor. I am dying." "Then sell the house," she said, latching on to the familiar argument. "Use the money for the best care, the best doctors. It wouldn't make a difference." I placed my hand on hers, feeling the bones beneath her skin, so like mine. "Nothing will. And I don't want to spend my final months in a strange place surrounded by strangers. I want to be in my home. But your father and I gave you everything we could," I said, sweeping my hand over the evidence laid out before us. "College without student loans, money whenever you needed it, childcare for Robert, love without conditions. We never asked for anything in return except your happiness." Eleanor withdrew her hand from mine. "Is that what this is about? You think I'm not grateful enough? You want me to thank you for doing what parents are supposed to do?" The coldness in her voice shocked me, though it shouldn't have. "What parents are supposed to do?" I repeated quietly. "Is that how you see it? As an obligation we fulfilled rather than sacrifices we chose to make because we loved you? You chose to have me," she countered. "That makes the rest your responsibility." I felt something break inside me, not my heart, which had already been broken by her coldness, but something deeper, more fundamental. The last illusion that my daughter understood anything about love or family or sacrifice. "Yes, we chose to have you," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "And we chose to love you. We chose to put your needs above our own, again and again. Your father chose to work 60-hour weeks instead of pursuing his own dreams. I chose to stay in a job I hated because it had good health insurance for our family. We chose to help you with the condo when we could have been saving for our own retirement." I slid another document toward her, a life insurance policy Robert had taken out when Eleanor was born. "Your father never told you about this either. He took extra shifts at the warehouse to pay for it. $250,000, all for you, in case something happened to him. He wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of." Eleanor stared at the policy, dated just weeks after her birth. "When you told me I would die alone in this house, I continued, the words painful but necessary. You weren't just being cruel to your mother. You were betraying everything your father and I ever taught you about family, about love. Her face flushed. That's not fair. I was upset. You're being unreasonable about the house. The house isn't the point. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. The point is that you see me, your mother, who would have died for you 1,000 times over, as nothing but an obstacle to your inheritance. That's not true, isn't it? I pushed the final document toward her, the updated will Harold had prepared. Read it. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the document. I watched her face as she scanned the pages, saw the moment she understood what I had done. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Her lips parted in shock, then pressed into a thin, hard line. This is a joke, she said finally, dropping the will as if it had burned her. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. You're leaving the house to a charity? Her voice rose incredulously. After everything Michael and I have done for you, what exactly have you done for me, Eleanor? I asked quietly. Since your father died, how many times have you visited without wanting something? How many times have you called just to talk, not to negotiate or manipulate? That's not... When was the last time you brought little Robert to see his grandmother? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling? What I was thinking? Whether I was lonely? We've been busy, she said, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears, judging by her flinch. Too busy for family? That's not what your father and I taught you. So this is punishment? She gestured at the will. For not visiting enough? For having my own life? No, I said, feeling suddenly tired. The cancer, always lurking beneath the surface of every conversation now, sapped my strength. It's not punishment. It's protection. Protection of what? A house that will be empty when you're gone? Protection of your father's legacy, of what this house represents. I looked around at the dining room where we'd shared so many meals, celebrated so many milestones. If I leave it to you, you'll sell it before my body is cold. You'll erase every trace of us to turn a profit. That's business, she said defensively. It's just a house. Bricks and wood and plaster. Just a house, I repeated softly. That's where we differ, Eleanor. To me, it's the physical embodiment of every sacrifice your father ever made for this family. It's where you took your first steps. It's where he taught you to ride a bike in the driveway. It's where we celebrated every Christmas morning of your childhood. Memories, she dismissed. You can't live in memories. No, but you can honor them. And I've decided that donating this house to become a shelter for young single mothers honors your father's memory far better than selling it to developers who'll tear it down for condominiums. Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're doing this to hurt me, to punish me for not being the daughter you wanted. No, I said, remaining seated. I'm doing this because I finally see you clearly, Eleanor. And what I see breaks my heart. What is that supposed to mean? It means that somewhere along the way, you became a person your father wouldn't recognize. Someone who values property over people, profit over family. I looked up at her, this stranger who had once been my baby. Someone who would tell her dying mother that she'll die alone just to pressure her into selling her home. Eleanor flinched as if I'd slapped her. I told you I was sorry about that. Were you? Sorry that you said it? Or sorry that it was what you truly believe? She had no answer for that. The will is filed, I said quietly. It's legal and binding. When I die, this house becomes a shelter for women who have nowhere else to go. No family to support them. No safety net to catch them when they fall. I'll contest it, Eleanor said, her voice hard. I'll say you weren't of sound mind. The cancer, the medications. Harold has arranged for a full psychiatric evaluation next week, I interrupted, to establish my mental competence. Dr. Patterson will testify that my condition doesn't affect my cognitive abilities. You'll lose, Eleanor, and you'll reveal yourself to everyone who knows us. Our friends, our neighbors, your social circle, as the kind of daughter who would fight to overturn her dying mother's last wishes. The color drained from her face. Image was everything in her world. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered, and for a moment, I saw genuine pain in her eyes. I'm not doing anything to you, I said gently. I'm doing something for myself, and for young women who need help. The question is, what are you going to do now, Eleanor? Who are you going to be in the time I have left? She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. pausing in the doorway to look back at me. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice thick with emotion I couldn't quite identify. Anger, hurt, perhaps even a touch of shame. "When you're sick and suffering and alone, you'll wish you'd listen to me." "I won't be alone," I said, with a certainty I didn't entirely feel. "But I may very well be without my daughter. That choice is yours." She left without another word, the front door slamming behind her with such force that the family photos on the wall rattled in their frames. Through the window, I watched her slide into her Mercedes and speed away, tires squealing on the quiet street. In the kitchen, the pot roast I'd prepared sat cooling on the stove, the apple pie untouched on the counter. I'd known she wouldn't stay for dinner, yet I'd cooked anyway, clinging to some foolish hope that food might bridge the chasm between us, as it had so many times in the past. I sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had taken more out of me than I'd expected. Physical pain radiated from my abdomen, a constant reminder of the disease consuming me from within. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Not about the will, that decision felt right, honoring both Robert's memory and my own values, but about confronting Eleanor so harshly. Perhaps there had been a gentler way to make her see, a path that wouldn't have driven her further away in my final months. But gentleness hadn't worked for years, and time, the luxury of slow reconciliation, was the one thing I no longer had. Outside my window, the oak tree's leaves rustled in a spring breeze, their whisper both comfort and accusation. This had been Eleanor's favorite climbing tree, the place she'd hidden when upset. Read books on summer afternoons, strung fairy lights for her 16th birthday party. Would she remember any of that when I was gone? Or would she remember only this final battle, this last stand of a dying woman refusing to yield to her daughter's demands? I turned my face into the pillow, Robert's pillow, still holding the faintest trace of his scent after all these years, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the cancer that would take my life, nor for the house that would continue without me. I cried for the daughter I'd lost long before my diagnosis, and for the mother who had failed to prevent that loss. 2 weeks passed without a word from Eleanor. In that time, spring fully arrived in Connecticut, dogwoods blooming in white and pink profusion, forsythia bursting into yellow flames along property lines, the scent of freshly mowed grass floating through open windows on warm afternoons. My body, in contrast to the flourishing world outside, continued its steady decline. The pain increased despite stronger medications. I lost weight, my clothes hanging on my frame like someone else's cast-offs. Dr. Patterson adjusted my treatment plan, focusing more on comfort than false hope of remission. Harold visited regularly, bringing paperwork requiring signatures and, more importantly, company during long afternoons. Mrs. Abernathy from next door brought casseroles I couldn't eat but appreciated for the kindness behind them. The ladies from my widow's walking group came one Saturday to help with yard work, planting impatiens in the flower beds Robert had always tended so carefully. But no Eleanor, no Michael, no little Robert. The silence from my only family cut deeper than the physical pain, a wound that medication couldn't touch. Then, on a Wednesday morning in late April, as I sat on the porch swing, watching cardinals flit between branches of the dogwood, a familiar silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Eleanor emerged, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater rather than her usual business attire. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. I straightened on the swing, wincing at the pain the movement caused. My first instinct was joy. My daughter had come back to me. My second was wariness. What did she want now? She approached the porch slowly, carrying what appeared to be a large photo album. "Mom," she said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Can I come up?" "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the empty space beside me on the swing. "It's still your home, too." She climbed the steps hesitantly, settling beside me with careful distance between us. Up close, she looked worse. Skin pale, eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "Are you sick?" I asked, maternal concern overriding our recent conflict. She shook her head. "Just not sleeping well." She glanced at me, then quickly away. "You've lost more weight. The treatment does that," I said simply. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, the swing creaking gently beneath us. A robin landed on the lawn, cocking its head as if listening to our stilted conversation. "I found this in our attic," Eleanor finally said, placing the album on her lap. "Michael and I have been talking a lot about family, about priorities." She opened the album, revealing photographs I hadn't seen in years. Eleanor's baby book. Robert had been religious about filling it out, marking each milestone with his neat engineer's handwriting. "Dad recorded everything," she said, tracing his handwriting with her finger. "First smile, March 3rd. First laugh, March 21st. First time sleeping through the night, April 15th. He noted that you cried with relief." I smiled at the memory. 6 solid hours felt like a miracle after months of waking every 2 hours. She turned more pages. First tooth, first steps, first word. Dada, to my eternal chagrin. First haircut, with an envelope containing a tiny curl of blonde hair. Robert had documented it all, creating a paper trail of love. "I don't do this for little Robert," she said quietly. "I meant to. I bought a baby book just like this one. But there was always something more important. A client meeting, a property closing, a networking event." She closed the album, her fingers lingering on its worn cover. "I found something else too," she continued, reaching into her pocket and withdrawing a folded piece of paper. "Dad's bucket list." It was tucked inside his fishing journal. She handed me the paper, a simple list in Robert's familiar handwriting. 1. See Grand Canyon with Maggie. 2. Learn to play guitar. 3. Visit Paris. Maggie always wanted to. 4. Build a boat. 5. Dance at Eleanor's wedding. 6. Hold grandchildren. 7. Celebrate 50th anniversary. 8. Teach grandson to fish. 9. Pay off house completely. 10. Retire and travel with Maggie. My eyes filled with tears. He'd accomplished only 2 items: dancing at Eleanor's wedding and holding his grandson. Everything else, particularly the ones involving me, had died with him. "He never got to do most of these," Eleanor said, her voice thick. "He was always working, always providing for us. For me. He didn't mind," I said, folding the list carefully. "He loved you. We both did. Building a life for you was his greatest joy. But what about his life? What about yours?" She looked at me directly for the first time. "I've been thinking about what you said, about sacrifice, about choices." I waited, sensing she needed to find her own way through this. "When I told Michael what you'd done with the will, he didn't react the way I expected," she continued. "He wasn't angry. He was ashamed. Of me. Of us." She twisted her wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond that had always seemed ostentatious to me, though I'd never said so. "He asked me what kind of people we'd become, that my mother would rather leave her home to strangers than to her own daughter." Eleanor's voice caught. "I didn't have an answer for him, Eleanor." "No, please let me finish." She took a deep breath. "I've been horrible to you. Not just that day when I said that terrible thing about dying alone, but for years. Taking you for granted. Treating you and Dad like ATMs. Like your only value was what you could give me." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, unchecked. "The worst part is, I didn't even see it. I justified everything. Too busy with work, building a future for my own child. But the truth is, I just wanted more. More money, more status, more house. Nothing was ever enough. The confession hung between us in the spring air, more fragile and precious than any apology could have been." "What changed?" I asked gently. Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood self that my heart ached with recognition. "After I left here that night, I was so angry. I went home and told Michael everything, expecting him to be as outraged as I was. But he wasn't. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me when I'd become someone who would tell my dying mother she'd die alone just to get her house." She looked down at her hands. I didn't have an answer for that either. A cardinal landed on the porch railing, its brilliant red feathers a shock of color against the white paint. We both watched it for a moment, grateful perhaps for the brief respite from emotional intensity. The next day, Michael took the day off work, something he never does, and went through our finances. He showed me that we don't need more money. We don't need another development project. We're secure, more than secure. All this time I've been chasing more when we already had enough. She turned to face me fully on the swing, and then I realized what I was about to lose forever. what no amount of money could replace. Time with you, my mother, in your final months. Something unfurled inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but its precursor, the possibility of reconciliation. I'm not asking you to change the will, Eleanor said firmly. I think you're right about the house. Helping young mothers who have no one. Dad would have loved that. It honors him better than selling the property ever could. Thank you for understanding, I said, reaching tentatively for her hand. She let me take it, her fingers cold despite the warm day. I'm asking for something else, she continued. Time. The chance to be your daughter again, if it's not too late. The opportunity to help care for you, to learn from you while I still can. It's not too late, I assured her, squeezing her hand. I'm still here. Eleanor nodded, tears flowing freely now. And I'm so sorry I almost missed that I almost let property and money matter more than being with you at the end. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken grief and newfound understanding between us. The cardinal flew away, its work of witness complete. There's one more thing, Eleanor said finally, wiping her face. Little Robert has been asking about you constantly. He made you this. From her purse, she withdrew a homemade card, construction paper folded in half, covered in a child's drawings of what appeared to be a woman with gray hair surrounded by hearts. Inside, in wobbly letters, "Get better, Grandma. I love you, Robert." He doesn't understand about the cancer, Eleanor explained. We haven't told him how serious it is, but he knows you're sick, and he misses you. I traced the childish letters with my finger, tears blurring my vision. I miss him too. Would it be okay if I brought him this afternoon? After school? Michael too. We could have dinner together. I'll cook, of course. The offer, so simple, so normal, so exactly what family should be, broke something open inside me. I'd like that very much, I managed to say through tears. Eleanor moved closer on the swing, hesitantly putting her arm around my shoulders that had once carried her as a child, that now felt too frail for such a burden. I can't fix what I've done, she said softly. I can't give you back the years I wasted on things that don't matter, but I can be here now. I can make these months count. As we sat together on the porch of the house that had sheltered our family for decades, I felt something shift within me, a release of anger I hadn't fully acknowledged, a surrender to the possibility that endings could also be beginnings. The cancer hadn't changed. My prognosis remained the same. I was still dying, but suddenly, I was no longer afraid of dying alone. My daughter had found her way back to me, not for what I could give her, but for who we were to each other, mother and daughter, linked by love stronger than time or disease or even death. We should make a list, I said suddenly, like your father's bucket list, but for us. Things we can do together in the time I have left. Eleanor smiled through her tears. I'd like that. Maybe we could even do one of Dad's. Take you to Paris? I shook my head. I don't think I'm strong enough for Paris anymore, but maybe we could sit in this swing every evening and watch the sunset. That would be enough. It's not enough, Eleanor insisted, but it's a start. She pulled out her phone. I'm canceling all my showings for the next 2 weeks, and Michael can handle the Westport development alone. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted. I really do, Mom. As she made calls rearranging her schedule, I watched a pair of goldfinches dart among the forsythia bushes at the edge of the yard. Spring continued its relentless push toward summer, with or without us. Life continuing its cycle, indifferent to our human dramas. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a sense of peace, not because I was no longer dying, I was, but because I might now do so surrounded by love rather than regret. It wasn't the ending I would have chosen, but it was an ending I could accept. Eleanor finished her calls and slipped her phone back into her pocket. There, now I'm all yours. Those 4 simple words I'd longed to hear for so many years, were the most precious gift she could have given me. Let's go inside, I suggested, struggling slightly to stand. I'll show you how to make your father's famous lemonade before Robert comes. He always said the secret was in how long you stirred the sugar. Eleanor helped me up, supporting me with a gentleness that reminded me of Robert. I'd like that. I'd like to learn all your secrets before... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Before I die, I completed for her, meeting her eyes directly. It's okay to say it, Eleanor. Naming it doesn't make it more real or more frightening. It just is. She nodded, swallowing hard. Before you die, then. I want to learn everything I can. How to make Dad's lemonade. How you fold fitted sheets so perfectly. What to plant where in the garden. All of it. Well then, I said, taking her arm as we walked slowly toward the door of our family home. We'd better get started. We have a lot to do and not much time to do it. Inside, in the kitchen where Eleanor had learned to bake cookies and Robert had danced with me on rainy Sundays, I began to teach my daughter the small domestic magics that make a house a home. Not because she would inherit this particular house, she wouldn't, but because these were the legacies that mattered, the intangible inheritances that cancer couldn't take and money couldn't buy. And for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt not just resignation, but something close to contentment. I was dying, yes, but I was finally, truly living again too. 3 days after Eleanor's return, Harold visited with final paperwork regarding the trust that would manage the house after my death. We sat at the kitchen table, the May sunshine streaming through windows Eleanor had washed the day before, making the glass sparkle in a way it hadn't for years. "Everything's in order," Harold said, his arthritis-gnarled fingers tapping the documents. "The Margaret and Robert Wilson Home for Young Mothers will be established immediately after your passing. The trust has sufficient funds for maintenance and basic operations for at least 20 years. "Thank you, Harold," I said, signing where indicated. "For everything." He nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else, Maggie. Something Robert asked me to hold for you. He said I'd know when it was time." From his briefcase, he withdrew a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's distinctive handwriting. My heart quickened at the sight of it. A message from beyond the grave. Words from the husband I'd loved and lost. "He gave this to me the week before he died," Harold explained. "Said it was just in case anything happened to him. I've kept it in my safe all this time." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. "Did he tell you what was in it?" Harold shook his head. "Only that it was important, and that you'd need it someday when things seemed darkest." After Harold left, I sat alone with the unopened letter, tracing Robert's handwriting with my finger. What final message had he left me? What wisdom or comfort did he send forward in time, knowing somehow that I would need it? I was still sitting there, the envelope unopened, when Eleanor arrived with lunch, homemade soup and fresh bread from the bakery downtown. Since our reconciliation, she'd been coming every day, sometimes with Michael and little Robert, sometimes alone. Today, she was by herself. "Mom?" She set down the food, noticing my distraction. "What's that?" "A letter from your father," I said, still staring at the envelope. "Harold just brought it. Apparently Dad left it with him right before he died." Eleanor sat beside me, her eyes wide. "Have you opened it?" I shook my head. "I'm afraid to," I admitted. "What if it's something painful? What if he knew he was dying and didn't tell me? Or what if it's something wonderful?" Eleanor countered gently. "Dad always did love surprises." I nodded, took a deep breath, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page of stationery, the nice paper I'd given Robert years ago that he'd rarely used, and a small key. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter, Robert's words jumping out at me across the chasm of death. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Harold has determined that now is the time you need this most. I'm sorry I'm not there beside you, holding your hand as we face whatever has come your way. First, know that I loved you more than I ever found words to express. Every day with you was a gift, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, because they showed me your strength and grace under pressure. Second, I have a confession. For the past 15 years, I've been keeping a secret from you. Not a bad secret, love, but a surprise I hope to reveal on our 50th anniversary. The key enclosed opens safe deposit box number 247 at First Connecticut Bank downtown. Inside is documentation of something I've been building for us, our future and our legacy. Over the years, I've been quietly investing a portion of my earnings in a separate account. Nothing that would impact our daily lives, just small amounts here and there that grew over time. It started the year Eleanor went to college, when I realized how quickly time was passing and how unprepared we were for our later years. The investments have done well, Maggie. Very well. Enough that you never need to worry about money again. Enough that our home can remain our home for as long as you want it. Enough that you can take that trip to Paris we always talked about, if you still want to. I meant to surprise you on our golden anniversary, to show you that all those years of careful budgeting and sacrifice had created something beyond just getting by. But life doesn't always follow our plans, does it? Whatever has happened that made Harold decide it was time for you to know this, remember that you are stronger than you think. You always have been. All my love, forever. Robert P.S. Tell Eleanor that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or property. It's measured in love, given and received. I hope she learns that before it's too late. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Robert's voice seemed to fill the kitchen. His wisdom, his love, his foresight reaching across time to steady me when I needed him most. "Mom?" Eleanor's voice was tentative. "What does it say?" Wordlessly, I handed her the letter, watching as she read her father's final message. Her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment, to something deeper, a profound recognition as she reached the postscript addressed specifically to her. "Dad knew," she whispered, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Somehow he knew I'd lose my way. He was always perceptive about people," I said, even when he didn't say much. Eleanor stared at the small key that had fallen onto the table. "What do you think is in the safe deposit box?" "Only one way to find out," I replied, suddenly feeling more energized than I had in weeks. "Can you drive me to the bank?" An hour later, we sat in a private room at First Connecticut Bank. A large envelope from the safe deposit box opened before us. Inside were financial statements, legal documents, and a separate letter from Robert explaining everything in detail. The truth was more extraordinary than either of us could have imagined. Robert, my practical, careful engineer husband, who clipped coupons and drove the same car for 20 years, had been an investment genius. Starting with a small inheritance from his uncle, he had built a portfolio worth over $3 million. $3 million? Eleanor repeated incredulously, looking at the latest statement. How? When? Dad was an engineer, not a stockbroker. According to his letter, he studied investment strategies for years, I said, still trying to absorb the reality myself. He was always reading those financial books, remember? I thought it was just a hobby. The portfolio was diversified. Blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, real estate investment trusts, even some early investments in technology companies that had grown exponentially, all documented meticulously in Robert's precise handwriting, with notes about why he chose each investment and what he hoped it would provide for our future. He did this all himself? Eleanor asked, flipping through years of careful records. No financial advisor? Apparently so, I said, reading ahead in his explanatory letter. He writes that he didn't trust anyone else with our future. There was more. Robert had established a trust, with Harold as executor, that would activate upon my discovery of these assets. The house had already been paid off secretly years ago. The mortgage payments I'd been making had actually been going into an investment account. There was a college fund for little Robert that would cover any university in the country. There was even a separate fund designated for Maggie's Paris trip, with more than enough for a first-class journey. And there was a letter for Eleanor, in its own sealed envelope. He thought of everything, I murmured, overwhelmed by this final expression of Robert's love and foresight. Eleanor was staring at her envelope, making no move to open it. I don't deserve this, she said quietly. Whatever it is, not after how I've behaved. Your father loved you, I said simply. Whatever is in that letter, he wrote it because he loved you. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and began to read. I gave her privacy, turning my attention to the details of what Robert had created, a financial fortress to protect me in exactly the situation I now faced. As if he'd somehow known I would one day be alone and vulnerable, needing this safety net he'd spent decades weaving beneath our ordinary lives. Oh, Eleanor's soft exclamation drew my attention back to her. She was crying openly now, clutching her father's letter to her chest. What is it? I asked gently. She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. When she could finally form words, her voice was thick with emotion. He knew me better than I knew myself. He saw exactly who I was becoming, and he loved me anyway. She handed me the letter. Robert had written, "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has happened that led your mother to the safe deposit box. I hope whatever crisis brought you to this point hasn't damaged the bond between you too severely. I've watched you grow from a curious, loving little girl into a determined, ambitious woman. Your mother and I have always been proud of your intelligence and drive, but I've worried too, especially in recent years, as I've seen you increasingly measure success in dollars rather than in happiness or love. This isn't a lecture from beyond the grave, just an observation from a father who made his own mistakes and learned from them too late in some cases. The enclosed financial statement is your inheritance, not what you expected, I imagine. You're already wealthy by most measures. Your business is successful, your home is beautiful, your family is healthy. This money won't change your life materially. What I hope it might change is your perspective. This money comes with two conditions. First, a portion must be used to establish a scholarship fund at your old high school for students who, like your mother and me, come from working-class families and need help reaching their potential. Second, you must take your mother to Paris. It was her dream since college, one she set aside to raise you, to support me, to be the heart of our family. Make that dream come true for her if she's still able to travel. If not, find another dream of hers to fulfill. These aren't legal conditions. The money is yours regardless. They are conditions of conscience, which I trust more than any legal document. Remember that everything your mother and I have ever done, including creating this legacy, was out of love, for each other, and for you. Money is just a tool. Love is the real inheritance I hope I've left you. Be the woman I know you can be. Successful, yes, but also kind, generous, and present for the people who love you. Don't wait until it's too late to learn what really matters. All my love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Eleanor, my heart full of love for my departed husband. Even now, years after his death, Robert was still caring for us, still teaching, still loving. He was right about everything, Eleanor said, wiping tears from her face. About what I was becoming, about what really matters. She looked at me intently. Can you still travel, Mom? Could we still go to Paris? The question caught me off guard. With the cancer, international travel seemed impossible. But with Robert's revelation, other possibilities began to take shape in my mind. Not to Paris, I think, I said honestly. But there might be other dreams we could fulfill together. As we drove home from the bank, the weight of Robert's legacy settled around us. Not just the money, which changed everything and nothing, but the deeper inheritance of values and love that had shaped our family. Back at the house, we sat on the porch swing, the same one where our reconciliation had begun days earlier. The financial documents lay on the side table, their existence still seeming somewhat unreal. All these years, I marveled, he was building this safety net and I never knew. All those extra hours at work, those weekends he spent in his study with the door closed, he wanted to take care of you, Eleanor said, even after he was gone. And you, I reminded her. He wanted to take care of you too. She shook her head. Not financially. That's not what I needed from him, though I wouldn't have recognized that a month ago. She gazed out at the yard, at the trees Robert had planted, the garden he'd helped me tend. He wanted to make sure I learned what really matters before it was too late. And have you? I asked. Eleanor took my hand, her grip firm and warm. I'm learning. Every day with you now is a lesson I should have learned years ago. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching birds at the feeder Robert had hung from the oak tree's lowest branch. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. The house, she said tentatively. Now that we know about the money, about Dad paying off the mortgage years ago, are you still planning to donate it for the shelter? Yes, I said without hesitation. That feels right to me. Your father built this house with love. It should continue to shelter people who need love and security. She nodded, accepting this without argument, a change that still surprised me. Then I want to help. I have connections, experience with real estate and zoning. I could make sure everything is set up properly, that the transition happens smoothly after. She stopped, still unable to directly reference my death. After I'm gone, I finished for her. I'd like that very much, Eleanor. I think your father would too. As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the lawn, I felt Robert's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as a continuation of love that transcended time and even death. He had seen what was coming, not the specifics perhaps, but the possibility of hardship. and had prepared for it with characteristic thoroughness and care. The cancer was still there, still slowly claiming my body. But in every other way, I felt stronger than I had in months. No longer just a dying woman fighting to protect her home, but the keeper of a legacy larger than the house itself. A legacy of love, foresight, and quiet, unassuming strength. That night, as Eleanor prepared dinner in the kitchen, insisting I rest while she cooked, I sat in Robert's old armchair, holding his letter from the safe deposit box. "You knew," I whispered to his memory. "Somehow you knew I'd need this lifeline." And in the gentle evening breeze that stirred the curtains, in the familiar creaks of the house settling for the night, in the sound of my daughter humming as she moved about the kitchen, I felt his answer, not in words, but in the peace that surrounded me. The secret Robert had kept all those years wasn't just about money. It was about faith in the future, even when that future wouldn't include him. It was about creating security, not just in financial terms, but in the knowledge that we were loved beyond measure, beyond time, beyond death itself. And that was a power greater than cancer, greater than fear, greater even than grief. A power that would sustain me through whatever came next. In the weeks following Robert's revelation, our lives transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The financial security he'd provided changed the practical aspects of my remaining time. I could afford the best hospice care at home, medications that weren't covered by insurance, even a part-time nurse to help with my increasing weakness. But more significant was the change in Eleanor. True to her word, she had rearranged her entire life to be present for mine. She worked remotely most days, set up at my dining room table with her laptop, close enough to check on me regularly. Michael took over more responsibilities at their business, understanding without resentment that his wife had more important priorities now. Little Robert came often after school, doing his homework at the kitchen table while I supervised from my recliner, just as I had done with Eleanor decades earlier. At 7, he was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he knew his grandmother was sick, and that his time with me was precious. "Grandma," he asked one afternoon, looking up from his math worksheet, "can I ask you something important?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, setting aside the book I'd been trying to read despite increasing fatigue. "Mom says you're going to heaven soon to be with Grandpa." His small face was serious, his eyes, so like Eleanor's, so like mine, focused intently on me. "Is that true?" The innocent directness of his question took my breath away. Eleanor and Michael had explained my illness to him in terms he could understand, apparently. I appreciated their honesty. "Yes," I said gently. "The doctors say I'm very sick, and they can't make me better." He nodded, absorbing this with the peculiar acceptance children sometimes show in the face of hard truths. "Will it hurt?" "No," I assured him, though I wasn't entirely certain. "The doctors have medicine to make sure I'm comfortable." He considered this for a moment. "When you see Grandpa, will you tell him I can ride a bike without training wheels now? He was teaching me before he went to heaven." Tears pricked my eyes. "I'll tell him. He'll be very proud." Satisfied, Robert returned to his homework. The conversation, so brief, so profound, stayed with me long after Eleanor picked him up that evening. That night, I asked Eleanor to help me to the attic. Though the stairs were difficult with my weakening body, I needed to retrieve something I'd remembered, something that suddenly seemed urgent. "What are we looking for?" Eleanor asked as she supported me up the narrow staircase, patient with my slow progress. "Your father's fishing tackle," I said. "The special set his father gave him. I want little Robert to have it." We found the leather case tucked away in a corner, dusty but intact. Inside were handcrafted lures, some dating back to when Robert's father had been a boy in rural Maine. Robert had treasured them, using them only on special occasions at the lake where we vacationed each summer. "I didn't know Dad kept these," Eleanor said, running her fingers over the worn leather. "He never took them when we went fishing at Lake George. He was saving them," I explained, "for when Robert was old enough. He wanted to pass on the tradition, father to grandson." We carried the tackle box downstairs, where I insisted on cleaning each lure myself despite my trembling hands. As I worked, I told Eleanor stories she'd never heard, about Robert's childhood fishing trips with his father, about the time he'd caught a record bass with one of these very lures, about how he'd taught Eleanor to fish using a simpler set because he was saving these for a special occasion that never came. I don't want to make the same mistake, I told her, saving things for someday that might never arrive. The next day, we invited Michael and little Robert for dinner. After the meal, I presented Robert with his grandfather's fishing tackle, explaining the history and significance of each hand-tied fly and carved wooden lure. His eyes widened with wonder. These were Grandpa's? Really? And his father's before him, I confirmed. 4 generations of fishermen have used these. Now they're yours. But I'm still learning, he protested. Mom says I'm not good enough for fancy stuff yet. I smiled at Eleanor over his head. Your grandfather would say the opposite. These aren't for when you're already good. They're to help you become good, to connect you to the people who loved fishing before you were born. Michael, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, spoke up. I'll take you to Lake George this weekend, son. We can try them out. The look of surprise and pleasure on Eleanor's face told me this was an unexpected offer. Michael had never been much of an outdoorsman, preferring golf to fishing or hiking. You don't have to, she began, but he shook his head. I want to, he said firmly. It's important. He glanced at me, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Michael, too, had been changed by recent events, it seemed. That weekend, while Michael and Robert were at the lake, Eleanor helped me with another task, one I'd been contemplating since discovering Robert's financial provision. Are you sure about this, Mom? She asked, as we sat at the dining room table, papers spread before us. It's a lot of money. I'm sure, I said, signing the document Harold had prepared. This feels right. What I had decided was both simple and profound. I was establishing a second foundation, separate from the one that would manage the house. This new entity, the Wilson Family Education Fund, would provide scholarships for working-class students from Fairview to attend college without the crushing debt that had become so common. The initial endowment would come from Robert's investments, but I had asked Eleanor and Michael to serve as directors, guiding the foundation's work after I was gone. To my surprise and gratification, they had agreed immediately. We'll need to establish criteria, Eleanor said, ever the practical one, making notes as we talked. GPA requirements, financial need thresholds, application processes. The most important criterion, I said, is character. I want this to help good kids who might not have perfect grades because they're working part-time jobs or helping with family responsibilities. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Kids like you and Dad were. Exactly. I smiled at her understanding. Not just the valedictorians, though they deserve support too, but the quiet strivers, the ones who might otherwise fall through the cracks. As we worked through the details, I felt a new sense of purpose blooming within me. The cancer was still advancing, my body growing weaker, pain a constant companion despite increasing medication, but my spirit felt stronger, more resolved. I was no longer just waiting to die. I was preparing a legacy that would outlive me. That evening, Eleanor helped me to bed earlier than usual, the day's activities having exhausted me more than I wanted to admit. You're doing too much, she fretted, adjusting my pillows. Dr. Patterson said you need to rest. I'm dying, Eleanor, I said matter-of-factly. Rest won't change that. I'd rather use what energy I have for things that matter. She flinched slightly at my bluntness, but didn't argue. Over the past weeks, we'd both become more direct about my condition, finding a strange comfort in facing the reality without euphemism or evasion. What else matters? She asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. What else do you want to do with the time you have left? I considered the question seriously. I want to prepare the house, I said finally. Not just legally, with the foundation and all the paperwork, but practically. I want to help set up the shelter that will be here after I'm gone. I want to be part of creating that future, not just imagining it. Eleanor looked skeptical. Mom, that's a huge undertaking. The zoning changes alone, which is why I need your help, I interrupted. You know real estate. You have connections at City Hall. You can make this happen while I'm still here to see it begin. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded resolutely. Okay, we'll start tomorrow. And so began the most unexpected phase of my cancer journey. Not a retreat from life, but an advance into a new purpose. Eleanor and I, once so estranged, now worked together daily on transforming the house into its future incarnation. Eleanor handled the legal and regulatory aspects, navigating zoning laws and building codes with the expertise of her profession. She discovered that with minor modifications, the house could legally accommodate 4 young mothers and their children, providing both privacy and community. I focused on the physical space, working with an architect Eleanor recommended to design the necessary changes, converting the formal dining room into a shared kitchen and living area, reconfiguring bedrooms to create private suites, transforming Robert's study into a playroom for children. "We'll need to widen this doorway for accessibility," the architect pointed out during one consultation, "and add a ramp at the back entrance." "Do it," I agreed, envisioning young mothers with strollers navigating the space. "And let's add a changing table in each bathroom." Each decision, each modification felt like a step toward ensuring the house would continue to shelter love and hope long after I was gone. It was an act of defiance against death itself, not denying its approach, but ensuring it wouldn't have the final word. Word of our project spread through Fairview. To my surprise, neighbors who had once viewed our house as merely an old property ripe for development now stopped by with offers of help. Mrs. Abernathy volunteering to establish a vegetable garden that future residents could maintain, Mr. E. Chen from the hardware store donating materials for the renovations, the women from my widow's walking group organizing a furniture drive. Even more surprisingly, several of Eleanor and Michael's wealthy clients made significant donations to the foundation, impressed by their commitment to the project. The same social connections that had once pulled Eleanor away from me now became resources for our shared vision. Michael, too, had undergone a transformation. One evening, he arrived at the house with blueprints under his arm. "I've been thinking about the backyard," he said, spreading the drawings on the kitchen table. "With 4 mothers and their children living here, they'll need a proper play area." The plans he'd drawn showed a thoughtfully designed playground, safe for toddlers, but with elements to engage older children as well, all nestled beneath the shade of Robert's beloved oak tree. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely moved by his contribution. "When did you design this?" Michael looked almost embarrassed. "I've been working on it at night after Eleanor falls asleep. I wanted it to be something special, something that would last." Eleanor, who had entered the kitchen during our conversation, slipped her arm around her husband's waist. "It's perfect," she told him, pride evident in her voice. In these moments, I glimpsed the family we were becoming, even as my time with them grew shorter. Eleanor reconnecting with her true self, Michael discovering new depths to his character, little Robert absorbing lessons about what truly constitutes a legacy. Cancer was taking my life, but it had paradoxically given my family back to me. The weeks passed in a blur of activity, punctuated by increasing periods of rest as my strength ebbed. By early June, the legal foundation was established, the architectural plans approved, and preliminary construction begun on the modifications to the house. Harold had helped arrange for the trust to hire a director for the future shelter, a compassionate social worker named Diane, who had once been a single mother herself. "I want you to meet her," Eleanor insisted one afternoon. "She's coming by at 4 to see the space and discuss operational plans." I nodded, though I'd been particularly weak that day. "I'll rest until then." When Diane arrived, a warm woman in her 40s with kind eyes and practical energy, I felt an immediate connection. As Eleanor showed her through the house, explaining the planned modifications, I watched from my wheelchair, which had become necessary for longer excursions in recent weeks. "The legacy you're creating here is extraordinary," Diane told me when they returned to the living room. "This house will change lives for generations. That's the hope," I said simply. She leaned forward, her expression both professional and deeply personal. "I was 18 when I had my daughter. Her father was gone before she was born. If a place like this had existed then, it would have changed everything for us. Tell me about your daughter," I encouraged, recognizing a fellow mother's pride. "She's 24 now, just finished her master's degree in social work." Following in my footsteps but without the struggle I faced, Diane smiled, the achievement clearly meaningful to her. "She's the reason I understand how important stable housing and community support are for young mothers. They're not just practical necessities. They're statements of value, telling these women that they and their children matter." As Diane spoke about her vision for the shelter, support groups, parenting classes, connections to educational opportunities, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. This was what the house should become, not an asset to be liquidated for profit, but a continuation of the love and security it had provided for my own family. Later, after Diane left, Eleanor found me resting in Robert's old chair by the window. "What did you think of her?" she asked. "She's perfect," I said. "She understands the purpose of this place in her bones." Eleanor nodded. "I thought so too. She has both the professional expertise and the personal experience." She hesitated, then added, "I told her about us, about how we almost lost each other over this house, and how working on this project together has healed something between us." "I'm glad you did," I said, reaching for her hand. "That's part of the story of this place now too." That night, as Eleanor helped me prepare for bed, an increasingly necessary assistance as my body failed, I found myself thinking about everything we'd accomplished in the weeks since Robert's posthumous revelation. "We've come a long way from 'you'll die alone,'" I observed wryly, as Eleanor helped me change into my nightgown. She froze, stricken. "Mom, please don't remind me of that. I can't believe I ever said such a terrible thing." "I bring it up not to hurt you," I explained, "but because I'm proud of how far we've come, how much we've both changed." Eleanor sat beside me on the bed, her expression solemn. I was a different person then, or maybe not different exactly, but lost. I'd forgotten what Dad always taught us about what really matters. "And now? Now I understand," she said simply. "I understand that this house isn't just property to be sold for profit. It's the physical embodiment of love and sacrifice and family. It's Dad's legacy, and yours. And now, in a different way, it's becoming mine too." I studied my daughter's face, the face that had once been cold and calculating when discussing my death, now softened by compassion and purpose. "That's why I wanted to prepare the house before I die," I told her. "Not just for the future mothers who will live here, but for you. So you could be part of creating something meaningful from what you once saw only as an asset." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. It's not about deserving," I said, echoing what Robert might have said. "It's about love. That's always been the foundation of this house." As I drifted toward sleep that night, I felt a profound sense of peace. The cancer continued its relentless advance, my body growing thinner, weaker, more dependent each day. But my spirit had never felt stronger or more purposeful. I was no longer afraid of dying alone. I was no longer afraid of dying at all. I had seen my family heal, had helped create a legacy that would outlive me, had found meaning in the final chapter of my life that transcended the physical pain and limitations of disease. In preparing for what would come after I was gone, I had found a way to truly live in the time I had left, not in fear or resentment or regret, but in love and purpose and hope. And that, I realized as sleep claimed me, was perhaps the most powerful counterattack of all against the darkness of death. Not fighting it, but transforming it into a doorway through which light could continue to shine long after I had passed through. By early July, my condition had deteriorated significantly. The cancer had spread to my liver, intensifying both the pain and the fatigue that had become my constant companions. Dr. Patterson had transitioned me fully to hospice care, with a nurse visiting daily, and Eleanor essentially living at the house, sleeping in her old bedroom most nights. Despite my weakening body, I insisted on remaining involved in the shelter project. Eleanor would wheel me through the house each afternoon, showing me the progress of renovations, walls being reconfigured, the new accessible bathroom taking shape, the playground equipment Michael had designed now being installed in the backyard. "The contractors say they'll be finished by the end of the month," Eleanor told me as she pushed my wheelchair onto the porch one particularly beautiful summer evening. The sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and purples, a spectacular display that seemed created just for us. "That's good," I said, my voice weaker than it had been even a week earlier. "I think that's about as long as I have." Eleanor's hands tightened on the handles of the wheelchair, but she didn't contradict me. We'd moved beyond false reassurances, beyond pretending that my death wasn't imminent. "I spoke with Diane today," she said instead, moving to sit in the chair beside me. "She's already reviewing applications from potential residents. There's a 19-year-old with a newborn who's currently in a shelter downtown, and a 22-year-old with twins who's sleeping on her cousin's couch." I nodded, picturing these young women and their children finding safety and community in our home. "They'll be the first then. If the timing works out, yes." Eleanor hesitated. "There's something else, Mom. Something I've been meaning to tell you." I turned to look at her, concerned by her tone. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. The Fairview Historical Society has approved our application to have the house designated as a historical landmark. This was unexpected news. Historical? It's just an old colonial. It's one of the oldest homes in Fairview, Eleanor explained. And with Dad's renovations preserving so many of the original features, it qualifies. Michael and I submitted the paperwork weeks ago as an additional layer of protection for the property. I understood the significance immediately. Historical landmark status would make it virtually impossible for future developers to tear down the house, ensuring its preservation regardless of economic pressures or changing neighborhood dynamics. That was clever, I acknowledged, impressed by their foresight. It was Michael's idea, actually. Eleanor smiled. He's become quite the preservationist since everything changed between us. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. In the distance, I could see the oak tree, now adorned with the swing set Michael had designed, standing sentinel as it had since before we bought the property. There's going to be a small ceremony, Eleanor continued. The Historical Society wants to present a plaque for the house. They've asked if we'd be willing to host it here next week. I understood the unspoken question in her words. Would I be well enough for such an event? Would I still be alive? Yes, I said firmly. I'd like that. One last gathering in the house while I'm still here to see it. Eleanor nodded, relief evident in her expression. I'll tell them yes then. We sat in companionable silence as the sunset faded into twilight, fireflies beginning to dance across the darkening lawn. In these quiet moments together, increasingly frequent as my energy for conversation diminished, I felt the bond between us that had been restored in these final months. Not identical to what we'd shared when she was a child, but something new and equally precious. A mature love between two women who had seen the worst in each other and chosen forgiveness over resentment. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Wednesday afternoon. As the day approached, I found myself growing weaker, sleeping more, eating less. The hospice nurse increased my pain medication, rendering me less lucid during my waking hours. Yet I clung fiercely to consciousness, determined to witness this final milestone. Wednesday dawned clear and warm, a perfect summer day. Eleanor helped me bathe and dress with particular care, selecting a lightweight blue dress that had always been Robert's favorite. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said as she brushed my thinning hair, now completely silver. "Liar," I replied with a small smile, but a kind one. By noon, the house was prepared for visitors. Flowers from the garden arranged in vases throughout the downstairs, refreshments laid out in the kitchen, chairs set up on the lawn where the brief ceremony would take place. Michael arrived early with little Robert, both dressed in suits despite the summer heat. "Grandma!" Robert rushed to my wheelchair, careful not to bump it as he'd been taught. "Dad and I made this for you." He presented me with a hand-painted sign reading, "The Margaret and Robert Wilson Home for Young Mothers," in childish letters surrounded by colorful handprints. "It's for when the ladies and their babies come to live here," he explained seriously, "so they know whose house it used to be." "It's perfect," I told him, fighting tears. "We'll hang it right by the front door." By 2:00, guests had begun to arrive. Neighbors, friends from my widow's group, members of the Historical Society, even Dr. Patterson, who had become more than just my physician over the course of my illness. Harold arrived with his wife, carrying a leather portfolio that I knew contained the final paperwork for the foundation. To my surprise, many of Eleanor and Michael's colleagues and clients came as well, demonstrating support for a project so different from their usual luxury developments. Diane was there too, already functioning as the shelter's director, greeting people and explaining the program to interested listeners. I watched it all from my wheelchair positioned in the shade of the porch, a strange sense of detachment mingling with profound gratitude. This gathering, part historical ceremony, part housewarming for the shelter's future, part unspoken farewell, represented everything I had hoped to accomplish before my death. At precisely 3:00, the president of the Historical Society called for everyone's attention. As planned, Eleanor wheeled me to the center of the gathering on the lawn, positioning me beside the oak tree that had watched over our family for 4 decades. "We're gathered today to recognize the historical significance of the Wilson home," the president began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Built in 1873, this colonial revival represents an important architectural period in Fairview's development. She continued with details about the house's architectural features and historical context, but I found my attention drifting, caught instead by the faces surrounding me. Eleanor standing protectively beside my wheelchair, Michael with his arm around little Robert's shoulders, neighbors who had watched our family grow over decades, new allies in the shelter project who would carry the work forward. The president's voice brought me back to the moment. But beyond its architectural significance, this house represents something even more valuable: the power of vision and legacy. Thanks to Margaret Wilson's generosity and foresight, this historic property will now serve as a haven for young mothers and their children for generations to come. She turned to me, holding a bronze plaque. On behalf of the Fairview Historical Society, I am honored to present this designation to the Wilson family, recognizing both the historical value of this property and its continuing contribution to our community. Eleanor accepted the plaque on my behalf, as we had arranged, knowing I lacked the strength to hold it. As applause rippled through the gathering, she leaned down to show me the inscription: The Margaret and Robert Wilson House, circa 1873, historic landmark, preserved in perpetuity as a haven for those in need. It's perfect, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. As the formal presentation concluded, people began to mingle, touring the house to see the renovations in progress, enjoying refreshments, congratulating Eleanor and Michael on the project. Many stopped by my wheelchair to offer kind words, but I found myself growing increasingly tired, the effort of remaining present draining what little energy I had left. Eleanor noticed immediately. "You need to rest," she said, kneeling beside me. "I'll take you upstairs." "Not yet," I insisted. "There's one more thing I need to do." I gestured toward Harold, who had been waiting patiently nearby. He approached, opening his portfolio. "Is everything ready?" I asked him. He nodded. "Just as you requested, Maggie." Eleanor looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "What's this?" "A surprise," I told her. "One last piece of business." Harold handed me a document, which I passed to Eleanor with trembling hands. "Read it," I instructed. She scanned the paper, her expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. "Mom, this is a matching grant," I confirmed, "from the Robert Wilson Trust to the town of Fairview. $1 million to establish a community center on the vacant lot downtown, provided the town raises matching funds within 1 year." Eleanor stared at me. "The lot next to the library? The one the developers have been trying to buy for years?" I nodded. "The same. Your father always said Fairview needed a proper community center, a place for seniors to gather during the day, after-school programs for kids, community education classes. Now it can happen." "But why keep the secret until now?" she asked. "Because I wanted it announced here, today." I gestured to the gathering, with everyone present to witness it, including the mayor and town council members your clever husband made sure to invite. Michael, who had joined us, grinned. "The developers won't be happy," he said. "They had plans for luxury condos on that lot." "Plans change," I replied, meeting his eyes with understanding. "People change." Eleanor was still processing the revelation. "Does this mean—" "It means," I interrupted gently, "that your father's legacy extends beyond this house, beyond even our family. It reaches into the community he loved, the place where he chose to build our life together." The depth of emotion on Eleanor's face told me she understood the significance, not just of the grant itself, but of the trust I was placing in her to see it through. This would be her project after I was gone, another thread connecting her to her father's values and vision. "I'll make it happen," she promised, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "The community center will be as important to Fairview as the shelter." As the news of the grant spread through the gathering, creating a buzz of excitement and possibility, I felt the last of my strength ebbing away. "Now," I said to Eleanor, "I think I need that rest." She nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind my simple statement. With Michael's help, she wheeled me back into the house and up the ramp they had installed at the staircase, away from the celebration continuing on the lawn. In my bedroom, the room I had shared with Robert for 4 decades, Eleanor helped me into bed. The hospice nurse, who had been present but unobtrusive during the ceremony, checked my vital signs with a professional expression that couldn't quite mask her concern. "I'll increase the pain medication," she told Eleanor quietly. "Call me if anything changes." When she had gone, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand in hers. "You orchestrated quite a finale," she said, attempting lightness despite the emotion evident in her voice. "Not quite finished yet," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper now. "Bring Robert up to say goodnight. And Michael, too." She started to protest that I needed rest, then stopped herself, recognizing the request for what it was. "I'll get them," she said instead. When she returned with Michael and little Robert, the boy approached my bed with the solemn carefulness he had developed during my illness. "Grandma's tired from the party," Eleanor explained to him gently. "I know," he said, showing wisdom beyond his 7 years. "Can I still give her a hug?" "Very gently," Eleanor cautioned. Robert climbed carefully onto the bed and leaned down to embrace me, his small body warm against my increasingly cold one. "I love you, Grandma," he whispered in my ear. "I love you too," I managed to say. "More than you can possibly know." He pulled back, studying my face with a child's directness. "Are you going to see Grandpa soon?" I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing my throat. "Tell him I can catch fish with his special lures now," Robert instructed seriously, "and that Dad helped me." "I will," I promised. After Robert climbed down, Michael approached, bending to kiss my forehead. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." I squeezed his hand weakly, no words necessary between us. He had become the son-in-law I'd always hoped for, not through blood, but through the deeper connection of shared values and purpose. When they had gone, leaving me alone with Eleanor, I felt a profound peace settling over me. Everything was prepared. Everything was in order. The house would continue its mission of shelter and love long after I was gone. The community center would extend Robert's legacy beyond our family. Eleanor had found her way back to the person she was meant to be. Little Robert would grow up knowing the true meaning of inheritance. "Stay with me," I whispered to Eleanor, as darkness began to gather at the edges of my vision. "I'm right here," she assured me, her hand warm and steady around mine. "I'm not going anywhere." As night fell outside my window, casting the room in gentle shadows, I felt myself drifting toward a different kind of darkness. Not frightening, but peaceful, waiting. "Eleanor," I said, my voice fading even to my own ears, "thank you for coming back to me, for becoming the daughter I always knew you could be." "Mom," her voice broke on the word. "It's okay," I assured her. "Everything is as it should be now." As consciousness began to slip away, I thought I heard Robert's voice. Not Eleanor's husband, but my Robert, calling me home. Perhaps it was just the medication, or the nearness of death playing tricks on my mind, but it felt real and comforting nonetheless. "I'm not dying alone," I murmured, more to myself than to Eleanor. "I never was." And as I closed my eyes for the final time, the last thing I felt was my daughter's hand holding mine, her love surrounding me like the walls of the house we had fought over, and finally, in the end, agreed to share with the world. 1 year later, Eleanor Wilson Davis stood on the porch of the Margaret and Robert Wilson Home for Young Mothers, watching as the autumn leaves drifted from the oak tree onto the lawn where children played. A year had passed since her mother's death, a year of grief and growth, of fulfilling promises and forging new paths. The house was fully operational now, home to 4 young mothers and their children. The renovations had been completed just weeks after Margaret's passing, transforming the family home into a functional, yet still warm and inviting shelter. Diane ran the program with compassion and efficiency, balancing structure with the flexibility young families needed. Eleanor visited weekly, sometimes bringing little Robert to play with the resident children, sometimes alone to handle administrative matters for the foundation. Today was different, though. Today marked the anniversary of her mother's death, and she had come to be in the place where she felt closest to both her parents. "Ms. Eleanor!" A young woman approached from the garden, a toddler balanced on her hip. This was Zoe, the first mother to move into the home, 19, determined to finish her education while raising her daughter alone. "I didn't know you were coming today. Just a quick visit," Eleanor assured her. "How are your classes going?" "Really well. I just aced my psychology midterm." Zoe's pride was evident in her voice. "And the childcare arrangement is working perfectly. Maria watches Emma while I'm in class, and I take her little boy when she has her shift at the hospital." This was exactly what Margaret had envisioned. Not just housing, but a community of mutual support where young mothers could help each other while building their futures. "That's wonderful," Eleanor said sincerely. "My mother would be so pleased." Zoe nodded, her expression turning serious. Diane told us it's been a year today since she passed. We're having a little remembrance dinner tonight. Would you like to join us? The invitation touched Eleanor deeply. I wish I could, but I have another commitment this evening, a groundbreaking ceremony. For the community center downtown? Zoe asked. I saw the announcement in the paper. That's another of your mother's projects, isn't it? My mother's and father's, yes, Eleanor confirmed. The town raised the matching funds in just 7 months. Construction starts today. After chatting a few minutes more, Eleanor made her way through the house, noting with satisfaction how the space had been transformed while still maintaining its essential character. Her mother's favorite reading chair remained in the corner of what was now a shared living room. Robert's bookshelves still lined the walls of what had become a study area for the residents. Family photos hung in the hallway alongside newer images of the home's current occupants. In the kitchen, expanded now to accommodate multiple families, Diane was preparing a large pot of soup, the same recipe Margaret had often made on cold autumn days. I thought the residents might like a taste of Margaret's cooking today, she explained when Eleanor commented on the familiar aroma. Your mother left quite a collection of recipe cards. The women have been taking turns trying them. This small detail, her mother's recipes continuing to nurture people in this house, brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. She would love that, she managed to say. After completing her visit, Eleanor drove downtown for the groundbreaking ceremony. Michael and little Robert were already there, along with Harold, now semi-retired but still involved with the foundation, various town officials, and a crowd of community members. The vacant lot beside the library had been cleared and prepared, architectural renderings displayed on easels, showing the planned Robert and Margaret Wilson Community Center, a modern yet welcoming building designed to serve residents of all ages. As Eleanor took her place for the ceremonial first shovel, she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Mrs. Abernathy from next door to her mother's house, now in her 80s but still spry, her eyes bright with approval. The mayor made a speech about community and legacy, about how one family's generosity was transforming Fairview for generations to come. Eleanor barely heard the words, lost in her own thoughts about transformation, not just of buildings or institutions, but of herself. A year ago, she had been a different person, driven by profit and status, viewing her mother's home as merely an asset to be liquidated, telling her dying mother she would die alone in a calculated attempt to manipulate her. The memory still brought shame so acute it was physically painful, yet her mother had found a way to use even that cruelty as an opportunity for redemption. Instead of shutting Eleanor out, Margaret had invited her into a different vision of legacy, one measured not in dollars but in lives touched, community strengthened, values upheld. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she stepped forward, looking out at the gathered community members. My father was a quiet man, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. An engineer who believed in building things that would last. My mother was a homemaker in the truest sense of the word. She made our house a home through countless acts of love and care. She gestured to the empty lot, soon to be transformed. Neither of them sought recognition or public acclaim. They simply lived their values every day, building a family and contributing to this community in ways both seen and unseen. Eleanor paused, gathering her thoughts. A little over a year ago, my mother taught me the most important lesson of my life, that true wealth isn't measured in property or possessions, but in how we care for one another. That lesson came at the 11th hour of her life, when I had almost lost my way completely. A murmur ran through the crowd. This level of personal disclosure was unexpected at a ceremonial groundbreaking. I'm sharing this today because it's the heart of what this community center represents. It's not just a building or a program or a memorial. It's a continuation of my parents' belief that what matters most is how we show up for each other, as families, as neighbors, as a community. Eleanor looked toward Michael and little Robert, drawing strength from their presence. My son will grow up in a Fairview that includes both the Margaret and Robert Wilson Home for Young Mothers and this community center. He'll know that his grandparents' legacy wasn't primarily financial, though they were blessed with resources they shared generously. Their true legacy was the example they set of what matters most in life. As the ceremonial shovels turned the first dirt for the new building's foundation, Eleanor felt a sense of completion. The promises had been kept, the legacy secured, the transformation of property, of purpose, of her own heart, accomplished. Later that evening, After little Robert was in bed, Eleanor sat with Michael on their back porch, sharing a bottle of wine as they often did now, prioritizing time together over the constant work that had once consumed them. "Do you think your mother knew?" Michael asked after a comfortable silence. "Knew what?" "How completely her last months would change us. Change everything." Eleanor considered the question, watching the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "I think she hoped," she said finally. "I think she saw potential in me that I'd forgotten was there. She was willing to fight for that version of me, even when I was fighting against it." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "She was quite a woman, your mother." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "She was." They sat in silence again, until Eleanor spoke the thought that had been with her all day. "You know what the greatest irony is? She didn't die alone after all. Not even close. She died surrounded by love, purpose, meaning, while I was the one who had been alone, even in the middle of my busy, successful life." "And now?" Michael asked softly. Eleanor reached for his hand, thinking of their son sleeping upstairs, of the young families in her mother's house, of the community center rising from empty ground, of all the connections that now anchored her life with meaning and purpose. "Now I understand what Mom and Dad knew all along," she said. "That success isn't measured in square footage or bank balances. It's measured in love, given and received." As night settled fully around them, Eleanor felt her mother's presence, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as a continuation of love and wisdom that transcended death. The lessons Margaret had taught in her final months had transformed not just Eleanor's priorities, but the entire trajectory of her life and her family's future. "You know," Michael said, breaking the contemplative silence, "I've been thinking about the Westport development. This was their largest current project, a luxury condominium complex that had been in planning for over a year." "What about it?" Eleanor asked. "What if we redesigned it, made 20% of the units affordable housing for working families? We'd make less profit, but we'd be continuing Mom's legacy in our own way," Eleanor finished for him, a sense of rightness settling over her at the suggestion. They talked late into the night about possibilities, not just for the Westport project, but for their business, their family, their future. Plans that balanced financial stability with social responsibility, that recognized their privilege and the opportunity it gave them to effect meaningful change. In her last months, Margaret had shown Eleanor that it was never too late to recalibrate one's moral compass. That lesson continued to guide her now, a year after her mother's passing, shaping decisions both personal and professional. As Eleanor finally went to bed that night, she thought about her mother's journey, from the cruel pronouncement, "You'll die alone," to the peaceful reality of her passing, surrounded by love and purpose. And she thought about her own journey, from a woman fixated on property and profit, to one who understood the true nature of inheritance. In the end, what Margaret had left her daughter wasn't primarily financial, though the Wilson family resources continued to do good work in the community. What she had left was far more valuable: a reclaimed soul, a renewed sense of purpose, a reconnection to values that money couldn't buy and death couldn't diminish. That was the real will, the true bequest, that had changed everything, and for that, Eleanor would be forever grateful.